Okay. All right. So Master Nick Doherty and Doctor of Acupuncture, right?
Correct. Doctorate of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine.
That is an interesting combination of skills to put together. Remind me not ever to walk in and let you grab me and push my pressure points unless it's for healing.
Right.
So we were just setting up this conversation with a discussion about bringing Kyusho kind of out of the Stone Age. And so we had to stop quick in the middle of our conversation to get the recording button going. So let's expand on that. Kyusho coming out of the Stone Age. What's that mean?
Yeah, and when I say that, I don't necessarily mean our knowledge is limited or in any way inferior or bad. It just, the purpose of the study of classical martial arts is to constantly evolve the art, right?
Right.
Thinking of new ideas. The body only moves certain ways. We haven't evolved outside of the use of, any of the major organ systems that we're aware of in the modern era. So, we're still in our day to day, just like everyone was thousands of years ago. So, and we're using that paradigm from this traditional language to understand Kyushu-jitsu.
Sure.
Um, and
Well,
it's all extremely valid.
what, just so that people have an understanding out here of Kyushu-jitsu, what we're talking about here is Dimmak. We're talking about
Right.
the death touch. We're talking
Mhm.
about, wait, I should say that with, hold on, you're supposed to put the effects way up
Yeah, there you
and
go.
go like this. The death touch.
Right. Now
Um,
we're early morning radio show. Yeah.
all right. So, but I mean, what we know, this Kyusho Jitsu Kenkyukai, the group that we are in, is a group that researches um or a research society, that talks about Kyusho, and that's definitely something that we have continued to do. Um when you talk about the evolution of pressure points from, if we go back to Oyata and Dillman's generation, it was well documented by Chris Thomas in the books. What's your thoughts on it now, looking back at that, as because you've been a part of that the entire time?
Yeah.
What's your thought on the evolution up to this point, and where do you think it's
Yeah.
going to go
Mhm.
from here?
After. I think it's really interesting because if we look back at it first becoming popularized, here in this part of the world, and you watch some of those videos in Oyata and Professor Dillman, and I mean, some amazing techniques being pulled off there. And then you go to the seminars and people just smashing and bashing each other, on the head. And so some of the question is like, well, here's this framework that we're using to understand all these points and how they connect. But there's also, plenty of just blunt force trauma. And I think that, when we talk about Kyushu-jitsu, in certain lights, it gets passed off as, you know, something that's not real, something that you have to buy into, and really, it's about a combination of factors, I think, coming together. All these things that Chris Thomas, Professor Dillon have been, proselytizing for years is just, it's that extra layer underneath the good body mechanics, the things that we've also focused on um, in our organization, and how do we just target a little bit better to hit these vital areas to cause an increased sensation. So a lot of what I see as kind of moving towards is that much lighter touch, where we're not blasting a guy on the back of the head to try to get a reaction, because that of course will get a reaction. And how do you tease out what is blunt force trauma and what is more of this kind of Kyushu-jitsu strike that we're looking at? And I think that they exist together so closely um, in an effect from any kind of technique that is really, it can be difficult to do. um,
Well, now, just a little background. Both of us came from martial arts that did not have pressure points.
yeah. Yeah, I was a
And
Taekwondo practitioner.
for how long?
I think I started when I was 13, 14 until I got my second dan
Okay.
in Taekwondo. So I think I stopped maybe around 19 or 20.
Okay. And I had 15 plus years in another Kempo system that teased that there was pressure points and some other stuff further down the road at the grandmaster level that might be introduced, but I never was able to experience or see anybody with that information.
Yeah.
I actually had one of the Chris Thomas's books with George, the Ruku Kempo book, and I brought the Kempo book to my class to show them some of the pressure points and some of the stuff I was looking at, and was told that stuff was wrong and put it away, and I shelved it. And so we're not coming at this from a standpoint of just trying to sell something. We had things missing in our art, and I found a lot of success in pressure points. And I know that there are people out there that still continue to call the pressure point world fraud, and that kind of stuff. But then noticeably, it is a rule in the UFC: no pressure points, no small joints. So clearly, it does work. The idea.
Yeah, I get that in
that,
my profession too. In the
right.
acupuncture profession, people thinking it's not, it's something that it's not, but it's, years or so in clinical what
Right.
acupuncture is doing. So,
Well, and I mean, it clearly has some value in what we are trying to do. I think this idea that we're gonna, that we just doop 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 and somebody's gonna fall down unconscious is a little unreasonable. And again, I appreciate all the time and the research and everything that the Dillman's generation, that time in the 70s and 80s, they really pushed the extremes on the Kyusho.
Absolutely.
And so that we don't have to. Okay, so we switched some headphones. It's very fashionable. So we were asking the question about simplification. Do we see Kyusho getting easier?
Yeah.
And because we get to take away the mysticism and the the mythological methods of the crouching tiger, hidden dragon, or the Kill Bill 5-spot death touch,
Right.
out of there. So where do you see that going now?
Yeah, it's this refinement of knowledge, I think, that is also happening in the acupuncture field quite a bit as that progresses to and in the modern age and becoming much more mainstream than it ever has been before. And anything that exists that we carry through the ages like this has that bit of, I like to call it, we romanticize the ideas of what this knowledge is or was, and in actuality, when in acupuncturists we talk about qi, we're not talking about mystical forces in some of our favorite movies that might be out there, and there's no one that would love that more than I am, or more than I would, if that's what it was.
Well, now I've got to ask the question then. I mean, it qi, it is mystical, right? How does a doctor of acupuncture define qi?
Yeah, so qi is defined as, we define it in a couple different ways. The motive force for life is kind of a fundamental definition, but that doesn't give us a whole lot of information. So if I'm talking about qi with a patient of mine, and let's say they're having headaches, okay, what I'm talking about is that potential function, the movement of blood through the vessels, and being constricted, that could be causing some pain. Or if they're having indigestion and nausea, I might be talking about poor stomach, or digestive functioning. And we just use a word to take on that meeting, and the word is qi, right? And is it this internal force? It's about action, function, and potential, right? So anything that is a moving force, a warming force in the body, the electrical conductivity across the heart is qi. And we could see that. We could see that with modern technology. You could hook someone up, do an ECG. You're measuring their heart qi. That's what we might describe it as in Chinese medicine. Now,
I'd hate to dive off because it's very easy for us to get over onto an esoteric
Yeah.
discussion, right? And
Yeah.
these rabbit holes are always deep. You know,
Yeah.
I have heard the term stealing chi. I've heard the term of chi striking. You know, it all sounds very mystical as well. You
Yeah.
know, and so when we're talking, you know, within my school, these are terms that are not used.
Right.
You know, that
Mine either.
we're you know, when we're striking pressure points, we're looking for localized reactions. We're trying to do things that'll even out the ability for a practitioner to win in a self-defense scenario where they're either a smaller person with a bigger person, or somebody with more you know, strength, or you know, physical prowess. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, it's necessary for us to even this out a little bit by using a strike on the arm that would be to a nerve instead of just trying to hit the arm. Um, you know, so over the years, the aim small, miss small has
Yep.
been, you know, a topic of discussion.
Mhm.
Are you still in, you know, and that's still that idea that we have to hit that point straight on
Mhm.
in order for us to have the result?
So I always answer that kind of question with, I think it's a yes and no. I think that yes, we absolutely, if we're practitioners of this art and we're trying to study at deeper levels, we should try to be as accurate as we can
Sure.
be, right? But I think if we're talking about different areas of activation, you know, these channels that all these points exist upon, um, are active all up and down the limbs, the torso, the head, anywhere you look in the body. So not to say that you're going to get the same reaction if you miss a specific point, but there's 361 known delineated acupuncture points that exist on
Right.
main channels in the body. There's a lot to choose from. You have about 180 extra points
You know, because obviously
outside of
some
that.
guy's throwing his
When
arm
an
out and you're trying to hit that spot. And I'd like to think that we can be pressure point snipers, but there are parts of
Yeah.
the body where there is some room
Mhm.
for error.
Well, I think if you look at the arm in particular, we see that, right? Like often we talk about large intestine 10 on the outside of the arm, you know, just distal to the elbow. Um, in the moment, you know, even in a randori situation or just a training drill, you know, yeah, you're going to be going for that point. The large intestine 11 is, you know, right up at the elbow. It's a great point. It's a transporting point as well, which is where we talk about the channel starting to go deeper into the body. This is a valid point to use. It's a little harder to access because of the bones of the arm. So this is where the anatomy really comes into play. But if I miss large intestine 10 and I hit large intestine 11, large intestine 9, you know, am I still going to get a desired effect? Perhaps. Am I going to get the exact effect that large intestine 10 is going to get me? Maybe not, you know, but I think Kyushu-jitsu is about situational awareness in those self-defense moments that
Sure.
allows the practitioner to make those decisions. Or, you know, the training doesn't really, it gives you that spur of the moment, like you're acting, not you know, cognitively trying to
I mean,
think of which point you're hitting.
right. I mean, as a general rule, you know, I will go to that elbow and I'll try to control the elbow,
Mhm.
especially if I'm on the outside line.
Yeah.
Now, it's really nice if I can hit that point, you know, but if I happen to miss it or not be as accurate,
Right.
either because of them or because of me, I
Hmm.
still am in good positioning because the techniques that we are using
Hmm.
work without the pressure
Yeah.
points as well. And I think that's
Yeah.
very important to understand is that we're not just stepping over here 100% faith in pressure points. The pressure points are a layer that gets added
No.
on to good structure, proper positioning,
Exactly.
you know, and a reasonable expectation for outcome when it comes to self-defense. We are not point sparring. We are
Right.
definitely trying to either defend or attack a line
Hmm.
um deliberately. So there's multiple things going on here with Kyusho being at that layer of, you know, if I can do everything else right as well,
Yeah.
and I add the pressure point, that the response should be large.
Right. Then you're set up for success.
Sure. Now, what if I miss the point a little bit? I still think our positioning, our good techniques, I still think leave us in a great position to defend, and a new opportunity will present. This idea that I missed the elbow, I got to start over again, or it's not going to work now because I didn't set up the point properly. I think is part of the mysticism here that we think that we have to
Right.
do this exactly perfectly, like we're playing the slots in the casino, and if we get it all right, we get the jackpot. And I haven't experienced it that way. There seems to
No,
be
I
a
haven't
lot of
either.
flexibility in understanding these pressure points and the regional effects of especially in the arm.
Absolutely. And I think, the catch is, like, you see someone performing a drill or a technique, maybe it's an online forum or something like that, and it looks, like they're barely touching them, or they're focusing solely on that acupuncture, or sorry, my mind's in that mode, in that point, that they're trying to hit. And that's practice, right? That's research, right? And research doesn't dictate clinical practice, right? That's how I look at it from a healthcare provider standpoint. It helps inform clinical practice,
Right.
but it doesn't mirror it exactly, right? So my research is, the one-on-ones that I'm working with my partner, I'm going through the drill, and the drill is just a drill, right? The practice itself, the clinical part of it is, as close as we can get in a martial arts situation without harming each other is our randori practice, where, or something where you're bringing up the intensity level and trying to be as safe as you can. And then you can see, where you're aiming, how you're hitting, how the body's moving in some way, shape, or form. And are you going to do that drill exactly the same time each time? Probably not. In a 2-minute round, you're going to get a couple times, right?
Well, and we've realized that just with repeated, consistent training, that we have people that, for example, kicking in the legs and going after the spleen points on the inner thigh. That I've got kids that are going after that every single time they step on the angle. It's now become just part of the drill. They're not really looking for a point. They are consistently kicking there, and they're getting better and better and better at that at that detail of hitting the point, not just the cavity. But what I also realize is that by hitting the femoral cavity, that they are affecting a lot more than just the spleen meridian.
Well,
and a huge reaction is coming out of that because they're going after cavity strike that is bordered by 2 meridians. So what, when we're looking at multiple systems being attacked, whether it's blood, nerves, structure, Kyusho to me just really kind of dials in where that location is. And gives me some regional targeting that seems to be very effective.
Well, and this is where, I think conversations, in our organization, our upcoming training that we're going to be having, where we're going to talk about the points are important in some way, but like the channel itself, which is exactly what you're talking about. If you look on an acupuncture chart, point chart, you see the dotted lines, right? You see point A, a little line, point B, a next line. And then we think that, okay, well, it's the size of a quarter, and then I have to hit the next quarter, up the arm or down the leg. And it can become very two-dimensional. And first in our training as acupuncturists, we learn anatomy and physiology, modern conventional anatomy and physiology, and traditional, which is the channel theory, right? The meridians that these points are connected to. And those channels are not that line. That line is just there for your mind to grab on to something, to understand that there's a connection. The channel is everything from the top of the skin and the hair that's on it all the way down to the middle of the bone marrow. So the channels are muscle tissue and sinew and blood vessels and nerves. And when you're activating that point, you're getting with a needle, you're getting a localized immune system reaction and a nervous system reaction because of that, right? And you're doing the same thing or similar thing when you're hitting the point with a Kyushu-jitsu attack. You're creating localized trauma that sends a wave through the system to react to. That's why it's reproducible, right? Like we hit large intestine 10, you can see the neck and head kind of come down and expose itself a little bit. So
what do you say about the guy that can take that hit? You know, it would be clear to me that there still is some reaction in the nervous system and otherwise, but not always a physical reaction that looks like something that was just effectively executed. We have a couple of those people. They're mechanics and carpenters and people that just have that. I want to say that shield kind of built up around their hands, their arms, because of what they're doing for a living.
Yeah.
And they don't respond that well. So I'm just curious as to what do you say about that when two different people strike and hit a pressure point, like say large intestine 10 we were just talking about, and one is a very extreme physical reaction and the other one is a very limited physical reaction.
That is an exact an example of just the difference of the human experience. I think we see that in acupuncture. We see that in a lot of different parts of medicine. This is why dosing and pharmacology has to be very exact, because we all have a different makeup in traditional medicine. We call it our constitution, right? And so all that physical work, building up the muscles and toughening the skin, that's armor, that's protection, right? So we might describe it in as an acupuncture point of view, like they have this strong yang qi, that protective, substance that they have.
So for example, you're talking like one of these Muay Thai guys that can take those kicks to the leg.
Right.
That whereas it would drop, the average person very quickly. That is a buildup of yang qi around that part of the body that it's protecting it now from those nervous system reactions. Interesting.
We have a concept in traditional East Asian medicine called Wei Qi. That's WEI. Now that specifically is connected to our lung system, and it has a lot to do with like our immune system, but also we're always existing in two worlds. The modern world and the traditional world, and we have to be able to describe it in both ways and understand that both are correct in some way. Just because something is described differently doesn't mean that it's invalid, right? As long as we're talking about similar things. They're building up that chi, and you can see that, someone who's doing that like iron palm techniques all the time, you can see physical effects from that, right? Like the knuckles start to get, overgrown and the tendons start to roll over. So they're
calcification of the bone to build up.
You got it.
Right.
Yep. And that's why this is a layer of the martial arts, not the martial arts only, right? If it was that simple, everyone would do it, right? It would be the be all end all of all learning. And I don't think we see that. We see multiple concepts existing on top of each other, all working in concert for a person.
So can you then give me an overview? We have this April weekend coming up, and everybody got very excited, and we filled that thing up in a week. We've got grandmaster level and master level instructors there, and a few people that are future, also people that are going to be we've allowed some third dans in there that are going to be filling up some of those shoes here later. What can we expect in the Kyusho training over that weekend? It looks like you've got about, obviously we're going to be on the floor the whole time, you and I, but you've got 5 hours of dedicated training that everybody's going to receive. What can we expect from that?
Right. So some of what we're going to talk about are these kind of what I'm calling kind of advanced fundamentals, and as we're learning kind of in the belt ranks, the Q ranks, we're giving like basic, here's cycle of destruction. We're going to hit these points, they work together, we can see that reaction. At this like master level, I think what we're seeing is that there's a distinct level of knowledge that we should all be kind of held accountable to in some way, shape, or form. That's at a little bit deeper level about this. And what I'm not going to do is teach people to be an acupuncturist. That's not what this is for. I'm not going to be teaching, big knockouts and things like that. I think we've done that. We've seen that. Everyone who's passed our core competency exams has reproduced those things, but how do we further refine the knowledge and understanding of these points? We're going to go into this channel theory a little bit more. I'm going to bring up concepts about certain point categories that we haven't talked about quite a bit in some of those hours. And then really part of how I like to teach some of this too is really get a sense of, well, where are people at with this level of understanding, and where do we need to shore up some of those deficiencies if there are some too.
Well, and that's definitely, an interesting measure that I want to see that as well, because it looks like we have, decades and decades of experience going to be in that room.
Yeah.
We've got people with 50 plus years, 40 plus years, 30 plus years of experience in the martial arts across the board in there, times 20 people. And the amount of knowledge is gigantic.
Yep.
So there is some assumption, walking in the door, that everybody is coming to the table with something. So how do you then, approach this without, I realize that a lot of people feel like, yeah, I've put time into this and, he's going to tell me I may be wrong, or I've got to relearn something. Do you see any of these kind of concerns as something that, somebody with this amount of time has to be worried about?
Right. No, I don't think so. I've always trained and learned in my schooling too in a very collaborative environment. So I hope people wouldn't come in and be afraid to be wrong. I think that our group is pretty good about asking questions and just being in those moments.
Right.
There are times when I'm wrong,
Right.
So
myself as well.
Yeah, and I learn by teaching too. I take so much away from these kinds of things that is really great for me personally. But I think my plan is to start with just, okay, here's some baseline concepts that let's make sure everyone kind of understands where we've started.
Sure.
Okay, here's some points. Here's the founding theories that we're all kind of at some level in, and then we're going to try to dive a little deeper.
Okay.
Some of what we're going to do is just like, let's sit down and talk about some of these theories, because they can be very esoteric in some way, and that's again due to that mistranslation and over the years, and we're prone to that in the martial arts community.
Well, and clearly, we are trying to not go there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not trying to get into a esoteric, deep discussion like that you'd have at the campfire over a weekend in the woods, with this. We're really trying to come in and leave with further knowledge.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we're not going there. So how, of all the things that, that we have, clearly we've got some things that, we're going to be able to feel out who's got this knowledge. Okay, everybody's got that. We're moving on. Is there anything that is obviously needing change? I mean, we have learned, and I'm okay with the fact that if I could go back now and talk about, even something as simple as my parenting habits, I mean, I'm a grandfather now, and I can look back and go, I should have done this. Are you at any spot now, after you're a practitioner first, then you went back to school, now you're a doctor, you're in charge of a lot of other doctors. So my question now, is there anything that you feel must change? Something that maybe feel like it's more black and white than just adjustment, like what we were just talking about?
Sure. I think how we introduce people to this knowledge should evolve in that way. Should change to mirror our own understanding. And maybe I always talk from this from a very unique perspective, just with my background in education. But I think that fundamental knowledge doesn't have to go right to learn these points. Here's the technique. It's like, here's the arm. Here's the inside of the arm. Here's the outside of the arm. And then you give them, the channels. I have handouts that I've used with some of my students over the years that are just like, the inside of the arm and the three, areas just mapped out. Like, I just want you to understand this for right now. If we're going to aim, we're going to aim for this portion of the arm right now.
Now, would you agree then, for I'm also, as an educator, I have to try to keep things in a place where we have mutual communication. That's really what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
By naming these things, I don't think that, in a fight, anybody's going lung, stomach,
No.
right, and trying to hit these things. But
Right.
the point of this is not only about communication between teacher and student, but that the teachers within our group really need this information to be able to have multiple points of view to discuss this with students.
Yeah, I think that mastery in Kyushu-jitsu means that you are a translator of this information.
Right.
So we understand the classical knowledge. We understand some of the modern anatomical things that are going on, the physiological changes happening. We understand that this is a layer and that body mechanics are still, the most important thing we can do. And how do we get all those concepts working together? That to me is what mastery is. It's not recitation of acupuncture points.
Okay.
It's not understanding, the diurnal cycle in some very deep and interesting way. It's
Definitely not just knocking people out.
not just
cold.
knocking people out. It's not that. That's why in my schooling it was always like, you gotta show a TKO kind of thing at knee dan level.
Yeah.
If it was the be all end all of our knowledge, wouldn't we be looking for that at like 7th, 8th, and 9th dan then? Right. So it's not, those beginning dan ranks are the beginning of understanding, right? That's why we asked for it there. So we have to keep going deeper. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, great conversation.
Yeah.
I look forward to doing more of these as we get closer to the camp. And then there's already been discussion about the expansion of that knowledge, because people are already aware that we're just going to start and open up that can of worms at the camp. And so, is there anything that we're looking forward to from I realize that this could almost be a whole career choice, right? To provide information for martial artists, but do we have, any, you're going to have some PowerPoints, you're going to have some new charts, you're going to have some things, something that we can hang on to and we're going to be able to learn from for that as well?
Yeah, I've got a PowerPoint, with that'll basically have just about all the information that I can put onto that available for people. Charts become a little bit harder, but we'll try to put as many of those, text on a computer screen. It only gets us so far. So try to have some images and things like that on there too.
Right.
So people have something to take away with them.
Well, that's excellent. Well, thank you very much for getting on here and and talking with me. Glad we solved our sound problems. Again, as we're learning here, we are now moved up to yellow belt in podcasting, video casting now. So
exciting.
I'm hoping someday to earn my orange belt in doing this, but
we'll get there.
We'll get there.